The music stopped before the warning light did. My brother stood at center ice with the arena master keycard in his hand, smiling for donors, while a thin red signal blinked above the south wall. I looked at him and said, "You wanted the arena, keep it running." Before we begin, I want to take a moment to say this. Hidden Revenge Stories is a channel about independent people. They rise above pain, betrayal, and hardship. They take back control of their lives. These stories are inspired by real experiences. They are fully reimagined. You will only hear them here. If this story speaks to you, leave your thoughts in the comments. If you have a story of your own, feel free to share it. It may become a new story here. Your story might give someone else the strength to keep going. Now let me show you how this one began. My name is Rowan Vale. I was 36 years old when my brother called me temporary in front of half the town. He did it under the Rink lights, with the city mayor standing 10 feet away and a photographer from the local paper smiling like she already had the shot she wanted. I had worked at Belmere Civic Arena for 11 winters. My brother, Nolan, had worked there for none. That morning, the staff were preparing for the winter charity gala. It was the biggest event on the Belmere calendar. The old hockey banners had been brushed. The plexiglass had been polished. Folding tables stood in neat rows over insulated flooring on the north side of the ice. A florist was arguing with the catering manager by the loading bay. Someone had burned coffee in the upstairs lounge. I was in the maintenance corridor behind Rink 2, kneeling beside the brine pressure panel, when I heard my aunt's heels clicking toward me. "Rowan," she said, not hello, never hello. "Nolan needs the key card." I kept one hand on the wrench. "For what?" "For the tour." I looked up at her. "The tour goes through the donor hallway, not the plant room." My Aunt Celeste folded her arms. She always dressed like she might be stopped for an interview. Cream coat, sharp lipstick, a scarf too expensive for this town. "He's showing major contributors the whole operation. It sounds better if he can open every door. He doesn't know what half those doors do." That isn't the point. There it was. Not safety, not procedure, not the arena. Image. I stood and wiped my hands on a shop rag. The refrigeration room stays locked unless I'm with him. Celeste gave me a thin smile. "That attitude is why people find you difficult." I handed over the donor hallway fob, but not the MasterCard clipped inside my jacket. She noticed. Her eyes dropped for half a second and sharpened. "Don't make today awkward." I said nothing. That was the first thing my family always mistook. They thought silence meant surrender. It usually meant I was still deciding how much of a mess I was willing to clean up after them. The Belmere Arena had never been glamorous. It smelled like wet gloves, old concrete, popcorn salt, and machine oil. Kids learned to skate there. High school teams fought there. Seniors walked laps around the upper concourse in winter when the sidewalks iced over. When the town wanted to pretend it was still thriving, it rented the main rink, hired string lights, and called it a gala. My grandfather, Martin Vale, had run the place for 30 years. Not owned it, run it. The arena sat in a strange legal space between municipal property and private operating trust. The land belonged to the town. The operating contract belonged to Vale Arena Services, the company my grandfather had built to manage the ice plant, staff, events, and maintenance. If you only listened to speeches, you would think Nolan had grown up learning all of it at Martin's side. He had not. I had. At 15, I knew how to read the pump gauges. At 17, I could cut ice cleaner than 2 full-time men my grandfather had hired before me. At 20, I was handling emergency shutdown drills, while Nolan was failing out of a sports marketing diploma and blaming professors for his own laziness. Granddad used to tell me the same thing every winter. Ice holds if you understand pressure. At the time, I thought he meant the sheet. Later, I learned he meant people. The first time Nolan made a joke out of me in public, I was 19. Granddad had let me drive the resurfacer during a minor hockey tournament because Dale Mercer had gone home sick with stomach flu. I had spent 2 years watching the timing, learning the blade depth, listening to the machine instead of forcing it. Between games, Nolan came down from the bleachers in a varsity jacket he had not earned, leaned on the boards, and said to 2 girls from his class, "Look at my sister." Dad wanted a daughter, Granddad got a backup son. The girls laughed because he expected them to. I remember the smell more than the words. French fries, sharpened skate steel, the sour sweetness of spilled sports drink drying on rubber matting. I did not answer him then either. Granddad did. He stepped out of the Zamboni Bay, took one look at Nolan, and said, "If you want to be useful, pick up a shovel. If not, get out of her way." Nolan had never forgiven him for that. Granddad died 7 years later, in late January, after a short illness, and too many people pretending the end had surprised them. At the funeral, Nolan wore a Navy suit and cried in the correct places. I stood near the back because my mother said the front pew should be left for immediate family and public figures, as if I had somehow become seasonal staff in my own bloodline. 3 days later, the operating company papers were brought out in our mother's dining room. No lawyer. No formal reading. Just family deciding what counted. My mother, Lorna Vale, sat at the head of the table with a yellow legal pad. Nolan lounged near the window. Celeste poured wine none of us wanted. Uncle Dennis kept talking about continuity, which was his favorite word when he wanted something without saying it directly. I asked one simple question. Who's taking over the plant operations? Lorna did not look at me when she answered. We're restructuring. What does that mean? It means, Nolan said, turning the glass in his hand, we're not keeping things in the Stone Age because you like wearing ear defenders and playing mechanic. I looked at him. You can't run this building from a donor list in a blazer. He grinned. Watch me. The papers that day did not remove me entirely. My grandfather would never have allowed that. But they cut me down where it counted. Nolan was named public director of Vale Arena Services. I was listed as technical support supervisor on an hourly contract. Not operations head. Not facilities lead. No voting authority on renewal negotiations. No control over capital maintenance planning. I still did the work. He got the office. That was how it went for 9 years. When a compressor failed at 5 in the morning, they called me. When pipes froze in the Old East Corridor, they called me. When the Youth Figure Skating Club complained that the ice had gone soft near the judges' side, they called me. When City Council wanted a speech, a ribbon cutting, a fundraiser, an interview, a smiling face beside a rendering board, they put Nolan in a clean coat and sent him upstairs. He learned a language made of phrases. Community investment. Future-focused. Modern experience. Revenue growth. He could say all of them without knowing what the ammonia alarm sounded like. Family gatherings got worse after Granddad died. Not loud, worse. Neater than that. Lorna started introducing me to people as, our Rowan, she keeps the back end moving. Nolan would say things like, Rowan is brilliant with routines. You give her the same system every day, and she's happy. Celeste preferred softer knives. Not everyone is meant for leadership. Some people are steadier in support. Support. That was the family word for labor. They wanted cheap and loyal. It might have gone on for another 10 years if Belmere Town Council had not announced the redevelopment package. That changed everything. The council planned to renew the arena operating contract for another 15 years and add a full winter expansion budget, new locker rooms, solar retrofit, restaurant lease, public grants, corporate naming sponsor. The contract would be worth more money than Nolan had ever seen in one place. It would also carry something he had never bothered to learn: long-term infrastructure liability. The moment I heard the proposal, I knew 2 things. Nolan would fight to put the whole contract under his own control. And if he got greedy enough, he would sign exactly what Granddad had spent years preventing him from touching. Granddad had not trusted Nolan with paper. That sounds cruel until you meet a man who thinks confidence is the same as judgment. 6 months before he died, he had me in the plant room after closing. Snow hit the cinder block wall outside in dry little taps. The dehumidifier hummed. He was sitting on an overturned bucket because the doctor had told him to stop pretending his knees still belonged to a younger man. He handed me a ring of old keys and one plastic access card with a scratched strip. This stays with whoever understands the system. I turned the card over. It had no name on it, just a faded code and the arena crest from before the redesign. What is it? Master override access. For the doors? For the plant. For the service records room. For every system that matters once people with soft hands stop smiling and go home. He said it flatly, not bitter, just accurate. Then he reached into the drawer of the metal desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. Not for now. I gave him a look. That's not helpful. It's not supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to be safe. He tucked the envelope back in and tapped the desk twice. If anything happens to me, Dale knows where the record copies are. You don't go hunting, you wait. Let people show themselves first. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. He had a streak of that in winter. Long nights made him philosophical. After he died, Dale Mercer stopped coming in for 2 weeks. When he returned, he looked 10 years older. He was my grandfather's longest-serving employee. He had thick wrists, a smoker's cough, and a habit of speaking only when he had something worth the trouble. Nolan disliked him immediately because Dale never treated a polished shoe like proof of authority. One night, about 4 months after the funeral, Dale found me relabeling valve logs. He set a battered tin box on the workbench. Martin wanted you to have these when you understood why. Inside were duplicates, old maintenance ledgers, inspection copies, equipment warranties, handwritten notes, not magical proof, just records. The kind people ignore until they become the only thing standing between fact and someone else's version of it. At the bottom was a folded note in Granddad's blocky writing. Don't argue with a man who needs witnesses to feel tall. Let him choose in public. Then make him keep the choice. I read it twice. Dale kept his eyes on the gauges. Your brother already asked if there were any legacy clauses he should know about. I looked up. What did you say? I said Martin handled records by function, not by ego. That usually shuts men like him up because they don't know what it means. That note stayed in my locker for years. Not because I had a plan. Because every time Nolan stood in front of cameras and talked about the arena like he had built it himself, I could feel something waiting. The redevelopment proposal stirred up old patterns fast. Council meetings, donor lunches, consultants in polished boots, architects pointing at screens. Nolan became impossible. He started sweeping through the building with investors on weekday afternoons. He corrected staff in public. He rearranged office space that did not need rearranging. He told the skate sharpening tech to look more premium. He ordered a glass display case for historical memorabilia and filled it with photos that happened to place him in front of the building as often as possible. My photos with Granddad were not included. Neither were Dale's. Neither were the women from the volunteer canteen who had kept half the town alive during tournament weekends for 20 years. The first direct hit came during the Gala Planning Committee meeting in early November. I was there because the floor protection layout had to avoid the cold seams near the north corner, and because someone had to explain that decorative candles on exposed platform edges above fresh ice were a bad idea. Nolan walked in 10 minutes late with a city councilor and a local radio host. He never apologized for lateness. He liked arriving to a room already arranged. When he saw me by the plans table, he said, "Good. Rowan can deal with setup details. The bigger conversations need to move." I asked, "Do you want the flooring to crack over the blue line when 200 guests step onto it?" The counselor blinked. Nolan laughed as if I had made a sweet, harmless little point. "See," he said, "this is exactly her lane. She notices tiny problems. That's what makes her useful." Useful. Not right. Not necessary. Useful. I watched the radio host write something down. He wanted a story that day. He got one. Just not the one Nolan thought. By the week of the gala, half the town had heard Nolan's version of our family. He was the future. I was the maintenance sister. He never said it that plainly into a microphone. Nolan was too careful for blunt cruelty in public. He preferred polished disrespect, the kind that sounded harmless until you were the one being reduced. At the bakery on Queen Street, Mrs. Hargreaves asked whether I was still helping out at the Rink. Helping. At the bank, a man I had gone to school with told me Nolan was, quote, really taking the place into a new era. At the feed store, someone said, "Nice that your family kept you on." Kept me on. As if I were a winter coat they had not thrown out yet. I worked longer hours that month than anyone upstairs knew. The south compressor had been cycling hard. The old brine chiller was holding, but not comfortably. A seal replacement had been delayed twice because Nolan kept pushing capital spending into visible projects. Lounge upgrades, digital signage, drapery for donor events, things that photographed well, things that froze badly. I put the issue in writing 3 times. Once to Nolan, once to my mother as company administrator, once to the council liaison attached to the redevelopment file. No one ignored me exactly. That would have been cleaner. Instead, they replied with phrases, "Let us revisit after the gala. Timing is difficult right now." Noted for Phase 2 review. The second major humiliation happened the morning of the event, and it was smarter than the first. When I went upstairs to the main concourse, I found the printed event program stacked by the registration table, cream cardstock, silver lettering, list of sponsors, speakers, historical acknowledgments. There was a section called Keeping Belmere Moving. It named Nolan, Lorna, Celeste, the mayor, the donor committee chair, the architect, the head caterer. My name was not there. Dale's name was not there. Neither was Omar Singh, who had done electrical emergency callouts for the building since before Nolan could shave. I picked one up and read the page again, slowly, because anger always made me more careful. The volunteer coordinator, Jenna, saw my face first. "Oh no," she said quietly. "Rowan." I looked at her. "Who approved this?" She hesitated. That told me enough. Not her. Nolan. Maybe Celeste, too. Jenna lowered her voice. "I thought there'd be a technical staff section," I asked on Tuesday. "And?" He said guests don't need a maintenance roster in a gala booklet. There it was again. Need. As if visibility were a luxury and work happened by magic until someone important walked in to describe it. I set the program back down without bending the corner. My mother appeared 2 minutes later in a dark green dress and winter pearls that had belonged to my grandmother. She saw the paper in my hand and sighed before I said anything. "Rowan, don't start." "Start what?" "You know what? Today cannot become one of your scenes. My scenes." That was what she called any moment in which I refused to disappear smoothly. My name was removed. It wasn't removed, it just wasn't necessary in that context. In the context of the building running? She stepped closer. Her perfume hit first, cedar and powder. "Please do not make me choose words carefully today. We are hosting donors, counselors, press, and the sponsor team from Toronto. Nolan is carrying enough." Carrying. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "The South plant is still unstable." She looked past me toward the registration table. "Then keep it stable." That was my mother's gift. She could turn need into order so quickly you almost missed the theft inside it. I went back downstairs. In the plant room, I found Dale checking a service note I had left on the bench. He read my face, then the program in my hand, then the silence around both. "No credit?" he asked. "No credit." He scratched his chin. Martin would have loved this. I looked at him. He nodded toward the old desk, the one Granddad had used. "Not because it's funny, because your brother only gets sloppier when he thinks the room already belongs to him." I leaned against the workbench and stared at the row of gauges. "Dale, if he takes the new operating contract under his own name, does the old protection still bite?" Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he set the paper down very carefully. "Depends which version he signs." My eyes lifted. There it was. Not the answer. A hinge. "How many versions are there?" "Enough." He wiped his hands on a rag. "And before you ask, no. I'm not explaining that in the middle of a gala setup with florists clogging the loading bay and your aunt treating folding chairs like diplomacy." "Dale?" He looked at me then, direct and steady. "You want him beaten or taught?" I said nothing. He nodded once. "Good. Think on it." Then he handed me the old master key card. "Keep this on you tonight." By 6:30, the arena had transformed into the kind of place people in Belmere like to call elegant because it made them feel briefly expensive. The main rink was covered with insulated flooring and dark runners. White lights hung in soft arcs from the catwalks. A projection of falling snow moved across the far wall. Sponsors, names glowed above the old championship banners. The temporary stage sat over center ice. It was beautiful. That annoyed me more than it should have, because I knew what sat under it all. A patched cooling line. A pressure issue Nolan had postponed. A service clause buried in the redevelopment package nobody upstairs had read with the right kind of fear. Guests began arriving in wool coats and polished boots. Men from council, women from the hospital board, the local construction firm that wanted renovation work. Families who had skated there for decades and suddenly spoke about heritage because a photographer was present. I stayed near the service corridor, moving between the plant room, the event floor, and the loading entrance. Every job I did made another one visible. One table had been placed too close to the emergency exit swing. A floral stand blocked the hose cabinet. Someone had taped cord covers over a seam that needed breathing room. The caterer wanted the bar fridge moved onto flooring that would shift under weight. I corrected all of it. No one thanked me. That was normal. What changed was this. At 7:10, Nolan took the stage for the donor preview. He wore a charcoal suit and a confidence he had not earned. Behind him, a slideshow rolled through renderings of the future Belmere Arena. Expanded lobby. Premium seating. Glass overlook lounge. A children's learning studio with a sponsor plaque already mocked up. My mother stood near the front with a practiced smile. Celeste floated between groups, touching elbows, lowering her voice when she wanted to seem intimate. The mayor made a short speech. The sponsor representative talked about legacy and regional pride. Then Nolan took the microphone. He was good at beginnings, warm voice, open hands. A pause in the right place. He thanked donors. He thanked council. He thanked his family for believing in a bigger future for Belmere. Then he said this: "Some people in a family are built for vision, others are built for routine. We need both. My sister Rowan keeps the ice smooth. I build what comes next." A few people laughed. Not everyone. Enough. I was standing 3 feet behind a service partition with a coil of black cable in my hand. I remember looking down at the cable first, then at Jenna, who had gone still beside the program table, then at Dale near the north wall, his face unreadable. I did not move. That was what Nolan wanted. A flinch. A walkout. Anything he could turn into proof that I lacked polish. He went on speaking about stewardship, transparency, and modern management, while the room nodded along. When the applause started, I put the cable down. 2 minutes later, Nolan came off stage, buzzing with the pleasure of his own performance. He cut behind the curtain and nearly walked into me. "Oh," he said, "there you are." I looked at him. He smiled the way men do when they think victory makes them generous. Don't take that the wrong way. It was useful contrast. Useful for who? For the room. People need clarity. What you mean is they need a version of the family that flatters you. He tilted his head. This is why you stay stuck. Everything becomes personal with you. Everything was personal with me because everything had my labor under it. My hours. My body. My expertise. My silence. He glanced toward the plant corridor door. "Actually," he said, lowering his voice, "good timing. I need the master key card." "For what?" "The sponsor team wants the full systems tour after dessert. It reassures them." "No." He smiled again, but harder this time. "You don't get to say no on a night like this. The refrigeration room stays supervised." "I'm not asking." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached into my jacket, took out the card, and let him see it. His eyes dropped to it immediately. Greed always has a tell. Nolan's was attention. His whole face narrowed when something became tangible. "You know," I said, "if you want full ownership so badly, you should make sure you read every version of the renewal packet." His mouth twitched like I had told a joke too dry for the room. "Rowan, please, you say things like that because paper makes you feel involved." He held out his hand. I gave him the card. "The master." He looked pleased in a way that should have embarrassed him. Instead, he said, "See, that wasn't difficult." I answered, "No, it wasn't." He walked away before he realized that was not agreement. That was release. Once Nolan had the MasterCard, events moved faster. Not all at once. That would have been too simple. A real collapse needs a willing man and enough rope. At 7:40, he took the sponsor representative and 2 counselors on a tour. He opened the donor hallway, the old trophy room, the mezzanine overlook. Then, because he wanted the story of access, he opened the service records room too. He should not have been alone in there. He should not have touched the locked file drawer marked contract archive. He did both. Jenna told me later that he came out carrying a slim black binder under his arm, smiling at the sponsor representative like he had just discovered buried treasure. At 7:52, Celeste found me by the loading bay. "Nolan needs you upstairs." I kept coiling extension leads. "Why?" "He wants you present when he signs the renewal declaration." I looked up sharply. "Tonight?" "Just the preliminary acceptance. It shows commitment." "That packet isn't ready for signature." "According to whom?" "According to the technical schedule attached to Section 6. She stared at me blankly. Of course she did. She had never read Section 6. "Rowan," she said, lowering her voice, "you really need to stop doing this thing where you act like everyone else is too stupid to understand the room." I straightened. "And you need to stop acting like a room is the same thing as a building." For 1 second, something ugly crossed her face. Not anger. Contempt. The old family kind. The kind that says you were tolerated only because you stayed useful. Then she smiled again because guests were nearby. "Come upstairs," she said. "At least try to look supportive." I did go upstairs. Not because she asked. Because I wanted to see which papers Nolan thought he was signing. The binder was on the presentation table beside the stage. Black cover. City crest. Sponsor insert. Operating renewal packet. I knew the package by shape before I got close enough to read the tabs. But one tab was wrong. Version C. Not the limited authority version Council had floated for phased review. Not the joint oversight version Granddad used to insist on whenever major plant upgrades were involved. Version C was the owner-operator assumption packet. The dangerous one. It transferred immediate control fast. It also transferred deferred infrastructure liability, emergency compliance costs, and refrigeration plant obligations directly to the operating signatory. Granddad hated it because it rewarded vanity. Men who wanted full authority signed it before they understood they had also agreed to keep every buried problem breathing with their own money. I did not know, until that moment, who had put version C in Nolan's hands. Dale did. He appeared beside me without sound, as if he had been built from cinder block in quiet weather. Nolan asked for the most complete version, he said. I kept my eyes on the binder. And you gave it to him. I gave him what he insisted on. Why? Dale took a long breath. Because 2 years ago, Martin's service reserve got raided for donor lounge cosmetics. Because your mother signed off. Because your brother smiled through every warning since. Because some lessons need ownership. He looked at me. Last chance, Rowan, you can stop this if you want. There it was. The choice. Not revenge. Structure. If I stopped Nolan before he signed, the family would regroup, smooth things over, and call me difficult again. He would lose face for a week and come back meaner. The plant would still be neglected. The redevelopment would still drift toward him. My labor would still be treated as background. If I let him sign what he had demanded, the contract would do what my grandfather designed old protections to do. It would attach responsibility to appetite. What exactly is in the deferred schedule? I asked. South chiller replacement. Brine line excavation risk. Control system retrofit. Compliance reserve. Emergency call obligations. Personal guarantee pending transfer review. I exhaled once through my nose. How much? Dale named a number so softly it almost disappeared into the noise from the ballroom. It was enough to choke a man who thought ownership meant applause. I looked at the stage. Nolan was laughing with the sponsor representative. My mother stood beside him, proud in the way only a parent can be when she mistakes arrogance for a rival. Does he know, I asked, that the preliminary declaration activates review of the liability schedule? Dale's expression did not change. He knows there is a schedule. That was answer enough. At 8:10, the mayor announced a symbolic signing for the future of Belmere. The room gathered. Phones lifted. Glasses paused midair. And Nolan, with the master keycard still in his pocket like a crown he thought he had earned, stepped toward the table where the wrong contract was waiting for him. If you have never watched a man walk willingly toward the exact thing that will break him, it does not look dramatic at first. It looks flattering. It looks deserved. It looks like everyone else in the room helping him believe the moment was his. That was what the gala floor felt like at 8:10. Warm lights. Polite applause. A string quartet near the south boards. Servers threading through the crowd with trays of smoked trout while the mayor spoke about continuity and civic faith. Nolan stood with one hand at his jacket button and the other resting lightly on the black binder. He loved props. Microphones. Keys. Programs. Documents. Anything that could be held up and mistaken for authority. The sponsor representative, Adrian Pike from Frost North Leisure, nodded through the speech with the patient smile of a man who had done this many times. My mother stood to Nolan's right. Celeste angled herself behind the mayor so she would land in any wide photograph. I stayed near the outer edge of the crowd, close enough to hear every word and far enough to avoid being summoned like staff. Then Nolan changed that. He looked up from the signing table, scanned the room, found me by the service entrance, and said into the microphone, "Rowan, come closer. This is family history. No point hiding in the back." People turned. So did cameras. This was positioning. He wanted me visible now, him at the table, me pulled from the edge, brought forward like proof that everyone had been included. I walked toward the front because refusing would have given him a different kind of story. When I stopped beside the side aisle, he smiled down at me. "You can stand there," he said. "Near the boards is fine." near the boards, not beside family, not at the table, not as technical lead, at the edge, where workers and hockey bags usually waited. A few people looked uncomfortable. Most did nothing. That is how these rooms work. Humiliation is acceptable if the lighting is good and the person doing it has a sponsor behind them. The mayor finished. More applause. Adrian Pike opened the binder and flipped to the signing page. Nolan leaned over and whispered something that made Celeste laugh. I watched his hand move through the tabs. He had not read the packet. He had skimmed the headings. Worse. He thought he understood the headings because they sounded like the kind of words he already used in interviews. He signed the preliminary declaration, then the supplemental assumption notice attached behind it, then the operating intent page that triggered liability review and immediate disclosure obligations. 3 signatures. Fast, confident, lazy. Adrian signed after him. The mayor added a witness mark. Then the photographer stepped forward and asked Nolan to hold the binder up slightly higher. He did. He might have walked away with nothing more than a risky packet and a flattering article if the south wall panel had not flashed yellow right then. A system advisory. Small enough that most guests ignored it. Large enough that I saw Adrian Pike's eyes flick up for half a second. Nolan saw it too. He covered the moment with a joke. She's touchy, he said, meaning the building. That is why Rowan keeps us honest. A ripple of laughter. Then he handed the binder to my mother. Big mistake. Because she opened it. Not to read it. To close the tabbed pages neatly for the next photograph. And as she adjusted the stack, a loose attachment slid partly free. Deferred Refrigeration Liability Schedule. I saw the title. Dale saw it too from across the rink. So did Adrian Pike. My mother pressed the page back in quickly, but the sponsor representative had already leaned closer. What's that schedule attached to? He asked. The room did not go silent. Real rooms hesitate first. Celeste moved one step forward. Nolan took the binder back too quickly. Standard technical appendix, he said. Adrian held out his hand. May I? Nolan gave a small laugh. Of course, it's all routine. Routine. He passed over the binder. Adrian opened it, where the attachment marked the page, scanned the first section, then the second. He stopped smiling. He lifted his eyes to Nolan. You've accepted direct plant responsibility under the owner-operator assumption packet. Nolan still had his public face on. That's right. Personally. Nolan blinked once. Through the company. Adrian turned one page and tapped a clause. No, not until Council Final Transfer Review. This binds the signatory to Emergency Compliance Reserve, deferred mechanical obligations, and service continuity costs during the interim period. My mother's hand tightened around her clutch. Celeste opened her mouth and closed it again. The mayor took one small step back. Nolan laughed, but it landed wrong this time. That can't be right. I stayed where I was. I said nothing. He looked at me. He looked at me because somewhere under all his vanity, Nolan knew exactly who in that room actually understood the building. Not Adrian, not the mayor, not our mother. Me. For one second, he did not look angry. He looked young, not innocent, just stripped. Then the expression changed. Rowan, he said, still holding the performance together by force, tell him this is just standard rollover paperwork. Every head near the signing table turned toward me. This was the moment Nolan had trained for without knowing it. He expected family to protect the picture first and the truth later. My mother found her voice before I answered. Rowan, she said softly, warning inside the softness, if there's a technical explanation, now would be a good time. Technical explanation. That was her preferred phrase when she wanted reality without responsibility. Adrian Pike kept the binder open. I would also appreciate clarity on the reserve exposure listed here. The page trembled once in Nolan's hand. Just once. Enough. I stepped closer to the table, close enough now that the photographer lowered her camera without being told. There is a technical explanation, I said. Nolan exhaled in visible relief. He should not have. I looked at Adrian first, not at family. Version C transfers direct interim responsibility for all deferred refrigeration obligations to the operating signatory pending final municipal review. Adrian nodded once. He had already read that much. I continued. That includes the South Chiller replacement assessment, emergency response costs, compliance work, and continuity obligations if the plant fails during the interim period. Nolan stared at me. My mother went pale in a way foundation does not fully hide. Celeste gave a sharp little whisper, "Rowan." I ignored her. Adrian asked, "And what is the current condition of the South System?" The yellow light above the far wall blinked again. Once. Twice. I said, "Unstable, logged 3 times this month, deferred twice for cosmetic budget reasons." Now the silence came. Closest to the table first. Then the nearby donors. Then the people at the bar who realized the room had shifted. Nolan recovered the only way he knew how. He attacked. "That is not my decision alone," he snapped. "And if there was any serious risk, she should have escalated it properly instead of acting like the only person here with a brain." There it was. His real voice. Not the Gala voice. Not the donor voice. The family voice. I looked at him and said, "I did escalate it 3 times. Adrian turned to my mother. "Was that documented?" Lorna said nothing. That told him more than an answer. The mayor cleared his throat. "Perhaps this is not the time." Dale's voice came from behind the second ring of guests. It became the time when he signed it. People shifted to let him through. He came forward in his dark work jacket, not dressed for a gala, not apologizing for it. In one hand, he held a worn clipboard. In the other, a sealed maintenance envelope with 3 date stamps across the flap. I had not known he still kept the originals on paper. Of course he did. Dale stopped beside me and handed the envelope to Adrian. 3 plant warnings, logged, copied, 1 to company admin, 1 to acting director, 1 to council liaison. Dates are on the front. Adrian looked at the stamps, then at Nolan. "Did you review these before signing?" Nolan's jaw moved. No answer. Dale was not finished. "There's more," he said. He pulled a second sheet from the clipboard. Old. Yellowed. Copied decades ago. The legacy operating note from Martin Vale. Any owner-operator assumption packet involving plant transition requires technical sign-off from the senior ICE technician or acting plant supervisor before execution. That note was attached to the original contract protections after the 1998 coolant incident. The yellow light on the south wall turned red. A thin alarm tone began. Not a full evacuation. A system fault escalation. Guests murmured. Someone near the back asked whether they should leave the floor. Servers froze with trays in hand. I took 1 step toward the service corridor. Nolan moved too. "Fix it," he said. That was almost funny. Almost. I looked at the binder still open in Adrian's hands, then at the keycard bulging slightly in Nolan's inner pocket. Then I looked him in the face. "You wanted the arena," I said quietly. The room heard it anyway. Keep it running. And that is where I will pause the first half. Because what happened in the next 20 minutes did not just embarrass Nolan. It forced him to find out what ownership costs when applause wears off. The alarm was not loud enough to create panic. That made it worse. Panic has shape. It tells people what they are feeling. This was thinner than panic. A red light on the south wall, a repeating tone under the music system, People turning to each other with narrowed eyes and half-finished questions. Nolan stepped toward me first because that had always been the family order of things. Problem appears. Rowan fixes it. Then everyone forgets who caused it. "Move," he said through his teeth. I did not. "Move, Rowan." Adrian Pike still held the binder. Dale stood beside me with the clipboard. The mayor had already taken another small step back, the kind men take when they are calculating how fast they can claim they were never really in charge. I asked Nolan one question. "Do you still have the master key card?" His hand touched his inner jacket pocket automatically. "Yes." "Good." I let the word sit there for a moment. Then I said, "You are now the interim operating signatory under the packet you just signed. That means emergency access responsibility sits with you." His face changed. Not because he understood the machinery, because he understood the room. He glanced from me to Adrian, then to the mayor, then to our mother. He wanted someone to laugh and dismiss the whole thing as technical fussing from the difficult sister. No one did. The alarm tone repeated. Jenna appeared from behind the registration desk, pale but steady. "Guests are asking if they need to clear the floor." I answered without looking away from Nolan. "Not yet. We need the corridor open, and the south side doors kept clear." Dale turned to Jenna. "No one steps onto the plant hall. Get Omar. Tell him I want the service panel opened and the auxiliary fan line checked." She ran. Nolan's voice rose. "This is insane. I am not the one who handles valves and pressure checks." "No," I said. "You're the one who wanted ownership without oversight." My mother finally moved toward us, clutch held against her ribs like she could brace herself with it. "Rowan," she said, low and urgent, "whatever point you're making, stop now. We have donors here." I looked at her. "This isn't a point. It's a system warning." She whispered, "Then fix it." There it was again. The family prayer. Make yourself useful. Then disappear. I shook my head. He signs. He decides. Adrian's gaze sharpened at that. "Miss Vale, are you refusing to intervene on a known fault?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm refusing to let the company continue pretending that plant decisions belong to me only when something needs saving." Dale spoke before Nolan could. "She can stabilize it. She should not do it without authority on the record." That was the hinge. Not capability. Authority. Nolan knew it. So did I. If I went down there and solved the fault with him still standing on the gala floor as Golden Boy, then this night would become a story about a tiny technical hiccup handled by staff. He would still have the packet. He would still have the image. He would still spend the next month telling everyone that my concerns had been exaggerated and emotional. If he wanted the role, he had to take the role. The alarm pulsed again. Omar arrived at a run from the loading side, hair flattened on one side, tie half loosened, because he had been helping the electricians route decorative uplighting like this whole night had not already insulted him. "What have we got?" "South pressure escalation," Dale said. "Likely chiller trip chain. We need the corridor clear." Omar gave one short nod and turned to Nolan. "MasterCard!" Nolan stared at him. Omar held out his hand. "You heard me." Nolan did not move. That was the first moment the room saw it cleanly. The man who had just signed for control could not even open the door that mattered without someone else telling him what his own hand was for. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What happened next was not chaos. It was worse for Nolan than chaos. It was procedure. Guests were moved back from the south side in calm, polite waves. The quartet stopped. The mayor's assistant spoke to the room about a minor operational pause. Servers retreated with trays. The photographer, who had smelled blood under the perfume of donor money 20 minutes earlier, now kept her camera low and ready. Nolan handed Omar the master key card at last. not with grace, not with authority. He shoved it at him like the card itself had betrayed him. Omar and Dale headed for the service corridor. I followed. Nolan did too, because now he had no choice but to stay near the scene he had created. My mother called after us. "Rowan." I kept walking. The service corridor felt like the truth after the Gala floor. Bare concrete, exposed pipe runs, rubber mats wet with melted snow from staff boots, the smell of machine heat and old metal. You cannot fake competence in a place that sounds like compressors and drains. Dale swiped the MasterCard and the plant door released with a hard click. Inside, the warning panel flashed red over the south circuit. One of the relay lines had tripped under pressure fluctuation. Not catastrophic, not yet. But the system had shifted into protective mode, and if it was left there long enough with the Gala load and floor insulation holding heat the wrong way, the south sheet would begin to soften under the event flooring. A Gala can survive embarrassment. It cannot survive a sponsor watching the floor warp because a man with a microphone signed a packet he did not read. Omar got to work on the panel. Dale checked the pressure logs. I crossed to the side rack and scanned the auxiliary settings. Nolan stood in the doorway, breathing too fast. "What does this actually mean?" he asked. No one answered him at first. Not to be cruel. Because the people in the room were busy. That was something my brother had never learned. Work does not stop to soothe the man who caused it. He asked louder, "Can someone tell me what this means?" Dale did not turn around. "It means the system warned you in public before it failed in private. That's generous for this building." Nolan looked at me. "Can you fix it or not?" I adjusted the line balance and said yes. "Then do it." I straightened. "You still don't understand." He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, I understand enough. You're enjoying this." I took one step toward him. "No, I'm done carrying it for you while you stand in front of town and call that leadership." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For once, the right words would not come because the room did not belong to his type of language. Adrian Pike appeared in the doorway behind him, followed by the mayor and my mother. Celeste stopped farther back. She did not like spaces that smelled honest. Adrian took in the plant room with one sweep of his eyes. The old pipes, the patched insulation, the fault panel, me at the controls, Nolan near the door doing nothing useful. Then he asked the question that mattered. Who actually runs this system? Not who speaks for it. Not who presents it. Runs it. No one answered immediately because the answer was visible. He looked at me and said, "Miss Vale." I met his eyes. I've managed operational plant response for years, without signing authority, without capital approval, without public credit. The mayor looked ill. My mother stepped in fast, desperate now. "Rowan, this is hardly the time to reframe family roles." I turned to her. "This is exactly the time. He signed liability for a system he cannot explain. You let him." The words hit harder in that room because there was nothing pretty around them. No string lights. No applause. Just gauges and concrete and the truth. Adrian asked, if this had happened on a game night, who would staff call first? Dale answered, her. Who filed the deferred warnings? I did. She backed them. Who reviewed them? Silence. The mayor looked at Nolan. Nolan looked at my mother. My mother looked anywhere else. That was enough. Adrian closed the binder he had brought in with him. Then Frostnorth needs to reconsider which version of Belmere we were just sold. Nolan snapped, "This is a temporary technical issue." Omar finally looked up from the panel and said, "No, this is a temporary mask over a permanent habit." Even I glanced at him then. Omar shrugged once. "What?" I listened at the gala. The warning tone stopped. The red light dropped amber. The room exhaled. I reset the balance and wrote down the final numbers before anyone could rush past the actual work to start rebuilding the story. Then I turned, looked at Nolan and said, "System stable for now. Liability still yours." We went back onto the gala floor to a room pretending it had not just learned anything. That is another thing towns do well. They reorganize embarrassment into weather. People drifted toward the bar. Staff reset trays. Someone restarted the playlist, softer now. The mayor's aide tried to gather the council group with a smile too tight to be believed. But the energy had gone wrong. Everyone could feel it. Nolan did what he always did after a crack appeared. He reached for control through aggression. He caught me near the side of the stage before I could get back to the corridor. "You do not get to humiliate me in my own building." I looked at him, then at the binder still tucked under Adrian's arm across the floor, then back at Nolan. "It wasn't your building 15 minutes ago. Now it might bankrupt you." His jaw clenched. My mother arrived before he could answer. Her voice was low, sharp, and more frightened than I had heard in years. "Enough, both of you." No, not both. That was her trick too. Flatten harm into conflict. Make the abused person share blame because it sounds cleaner. I said, "No, not both." Lorna's eyes flashed. "You will not speak to me like that in public." I held her gaze. "You have spoken about me like that in public for years." That landed. Not because it was eloquent, because it was plain. Nolan cut in. "Mom, stop engaging. She wants an audience." I laughed then, small and hard. "You built an entire life out of needing one." His face changed again. He moved closer. "Tell me exactly what that schedule means." "Read it." "I'm asking you, and I'm telling you to read what you sign." He lowered his voice. "You knew." "Yes." "You let me sign it." "Yes." For a moment, I thought he might actually say something honest, something like, "You set me up," or "I trusted the wrong thing," or "I wanted too much too fast." Instead, he said, the one thing men like Nolan always reach for when they are cornered. "You've always been jealous." I stared at him. Not because it hurt. Because after all these years, that was still the best he had. My mother seized it. "Rowan, you have resented Nolan since your grandfather favored you in the plant. Everyone knows that." Everyone. Always everyone. A ghost crowd that appears whenever a family needs its ugliest lies to feel normal. I said, "Granddad didn't favor me. He trusted the person who did the work." Celeste arrived then, quick and cold. "This has gone far enough. Rowan, hand over any internal records you're holding and go home. We'll manage the rest." There was the third move. Erase. Discredit. Take documents. I looked at her and knew, suddenly, exactly who had placed version C on the gala table. Not Dale. He had let it happen. Celeste had arranged it. Not to trap Nolan. To hurry the optics. She was the one who always liked the aggressive version. Push the packet through, get the photo, lock the mood before anyone technical could slow things down. I asked her, "You switched the packet, didn't you?" She blinked once. Too slow. Nolan turned to her. "What?" Celeste recovered fast. "Don't be ridiculous." I stepped closer. The phased review binder had a blue tab. This one had black inserts from the records room. "You pulled the wrong archive copy because you wanted him to sign tonight before council asked harder questions." My mother looked from me to Celeste. Not shocked, just calculating. Celeste said, "Even if that were true, he should have reviewed it." There. Not denial. Distance. Nolan heard it too. He stared at her, and for the first time that night, his confidence broke in a direction I recognized from childhood. Not rage, betrayed vanity. "You told me it was the clean packet." Celeste lifted one shoulder. "I told you it was the strongest packet. Those are not the same thing." "No," I said quietly, "they aren't." Adrian Pike approached before the argument could turn inward enough to lose the public usefulness of it. "I need a private conversation," he said. "Not to all of us, not to family, to the operating signatory. Now." He looked directly at Nolan. And Nolan, still holding the ruins of his own image together with nothing but reflex, followed him toward the upstairs lounge like a man walking after a doctor who had already seen the scan. The private conversation upstairs lasted 28 minutes, long enough for rumor to spread through the gala floor in rings. Not accurate rumor. Never that. Just enough. Something about the contract, something about the plant, something about the sponsor looking unhappy, something about the old maintenance people being right all along. I stayed downstairs because there was actual work to do. Omar wanted the secondary check completed before the floor load shifted again. Dale and I ran through the South readings twice. Jenna came down with 3 untouched champagne flutes on a tray and asked if we needed water instead. I almost smiled. At 8:50, the ballroom looked restored from a distance. That is what false recovery looks like. Tablecloth smooth, guests back in clusters, music on. But the room had learned a new angle on Nolan and could not unlearn it. He came back down just after 9. He had aged. Not physically. Structurally. The sponsor representative walked beside him, not behind. The mayor followed 2 steps back. My mother and Celeste were already waiting at the foot of the stairs, tension standing in both of them like a second spine. Nolan crossed the floor straight toward me. That alone told me the upstairs meeting had not gone his way. Men who still feel powerful do not go looking for the sister they mocked on stage. "We need to talk in private." I wiped my hands with the rag I still had tucked into my belt. "No, this isn't a request." I looked at him for a long second, then at the room around us, then back at him. "Yes, it is." He swallowed. That was new. His voice dropped. "Fine, then here." Adrian remained close enough to hear. So did the mayor. So did half the room, pretending not to. "What would it take," Nolan asked, "for you to step in as technical guarantor on the interim period?" There it was. Not apology. Transfer. He wanted my competence attached to his signature after the fact. I asked, "Did Adrian ask for that?" Adrian answered himself. I asked whether there was anyone with demonstrated operational authority who could credibly stabilize risk during the review window. Which is not the same thing, I said, as saving his public rollout. Adrian did not disagree. My mother stepped in before Nolan could. "Rowan, this is not the moment for bitterness. If the arena loses Frost North, the town loses the expansion, staff lose jobs, programs lose funding. Do not do something selfish because you are upset." Selfish. I had spent half my life watching people use that word whenever I stopped letting them harvest me. I said, "You left my name out of the program." Her face tightened. "You called me support. You called me routine. You told me to keep things stable while he got the future. Now the future has a bill attached and suddenly I'm essential again." Nolan ran a hand through his hair. "This isn't about the program." "No," I said. "It's about the years that made the program possible." The mayor cleared his throat. Perhaps a temporary memorandum could be drafted. Dale, standing 10 feet away with his clipboard under one arm, said, "Not tonight." Everyone looked at him. He did not flinch. Any technical guarantor would need authority, records access, capital approval, liability limits, and decision control. Otherwise, you're not asking for help. You're asking for cover. Adrian gave him a sharp look of respect. He turned back to me. "Would you consider such a role if properly structured?" Nolan stared at me like the answer belonged to family. It didn't. That was the whole point. I said, "Not under him." My mother inhaled sharply. Celeste muttered, "Vindictive." I ignored her. Then I added, "If Belmere wants a legitimate stabilization plan, it needs operational authority separated from vanity leadership. Full records review, capital freeze on cosmetic spending, independent plant assessment, and no public statements issued without technical sign-off. The mayor looked overwhelmed already. Adrian Pike looked interested. Nolan looked like a man hearing his own replacement described in practical language. "Are you trying to take the contract from me?" he asked. I answered him with the simplest truth available. "No, I'm letting the contract decide who can carry it." That was when he lost his temper for real. Not loud enough to shout. Worse, sharp enough to slip. "This is exactly why no one ever trusted you with the front of the business. You don't know how to make people comfortable." The silence after that was different, because no one in the room could pretend anymore that I had imagined it. The contempt, the habit, the shape of the family. Adrian looked at Nolan the way investors look at mold behind painted walls. And Nolan, finally hearing himself through someone else's standards, knew he had said it in the wrong room. The last public collapse did not happen at the signing table. It happened at the microphone Nolan tried to reclaim. At 9:10, the mayor's assistant announced a brief remarks update so the evening could return to celebration. That phrase alone told me nobody upstairs knew how damaged the night already was. Nolan took the microphone because he could not bear not to. That was his last mistake. He stood under the lights again, no longer glowing in them, just exposed by them. My mother stayed near the stage stairs, rigid with hope. Celeste folded both hands over her clutch, already looking for her next angle. Adrian Pike remained at the back of the donor section, arms folded, expression neutral in the expensive way that means deadly. Nolan smiled at the room. Or tried to. As many of you know, he began, large civic projects sometimes come with technical complexities. A few polite nods. No warmth. He kept going. "We've had a minor systems question tonight, nothing more, and our family team is already working through it together." Family team. That was for the room. For the paper tomorrow. For anyone still willing to believe that labor and credit had always been shared. Then he said my name. Rowan has always been emotional about the arena. Not skilled, not central, emotional. A small sound went through the room. Not laughter, not support, just the collective intake of people hearing the mass crack a little wider than intended. He pressed on because he did not know how to stop. She cares deeply, which we appreciate. Sometimes that passion can cloud perspective. But leadership means seeing the bigger picture. I looked at Jenna. She looked down at the program stack. Dale did not move at all. Omar crossed his arms. Nolan raised the mic slightly. "Belmere does not need panic from people who live in the boiler room. It needs vision." That was the line. Not because it was the cruelest thing he had ever said to me. Because it was the wrong thing to say after an entire room had just watched who actually knew the building. Adrian did not even look at me first. He looked at the mayor and said, clearly enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, "If this is your preferred operator, Frost North is suspending sponsorship review effective immediately." The room snapped toward him. The mayor blanched. "Mr. Pike, perhaps we should speak privately." "We already did." Nolan turned, startled. "You can't do that over a misunderstanding." Adrian's voice stayed calm. "This is not a misunderstanding. It is a governance problem." That phrase spread through the room faster than any shout could have. Governance problem. Donors heard it. Council heard it. The hospital board chair heard it. The photographer definitely heard it. My mother rushed up the stage stairs then, abandoning Grace entirely. "Nolan, put the microphone down." He did not. "Mom, just give me a second." "No, put it down." But he was a man already falling in public. Men like that always think one more sentence will rebuild the floor beneath them. He looked out at the room and said, "For years this building has been held back by people who know maintenance but nothing about growth." Adrian turned away before he finished. That was what ended it. Not outrage, not confrontation, withdrawal. The sponsor representative stepped off the donor floor, and crossed toward the mayor without another glance at Nolan. The mayor followed. 2 counselors followed the mayor. Then the donor committee chair, who until an hour ago had been laughing at Nolan's jokes, quietly turned her body away from the stage and started speaking to Jenna about coat check timing, as if leaving early had always been her idea. It spread. 1 turn, then another, then clusters, breaking. Not dramatic. Decisive. That is how a room withdraws its belief. Nolan finally lowered the microphone, but by then the evening had already chosen against him. He looked toward my mother. She looked back at him as if he had become a task. Celeste had gone very still. I stood by the service entrance with my work jacket half unzipped and the smell of cold air still clinging to the sleeves, and for the first time in my life, nobody in my family seemed able to decide what role to put me in. That was the shift. Not applause. Not revenge. Control. Nolan stepped off the stage and came straight toward me again. No cameras now. No donor smile. Just a man who had finally reached the part where consequences stopped sounding theoretical. He stopped a foot away and said, very quietly, "You did this." I looked at him and answered with the only sentence that fit. "No. You signed it." The gala ended early. Officially, the reason was an unexpected systems review requiring closure of the main floor after 10. That line went out by text before most guests even reached the car park. By midnight, half the town had seen some version of it. By breakfast, everyone knew the simpler truth. Nolan had tried to own the arena in public. The arena had answered back. At 10:15, after the last donor left and the caterers began scraping plates into tubs by the loading bay, my mother cornered me in the upstairs lounge. The room smelled like extinguished candles, red wine, and melting ice from decorative centerpieces someone had thought looked winter elegant. Her shoes were off. She stood in stockings on the carpet, pearls still at her throat, looking less grand than tired. You could have stopped him. I set the plant logs on the side table before answering. So could you. Her mouth tightened. That is not fair. No, fair would have been saying my name before tonight. She sat down heavily in one of the donor chairs and looked older than I had ever let myself notice. Not softened, just worn thin where image had finally stopped paying for itself. "I was trying to keep this family together," she said. I almost asked which family. The one on stage. The one in programs. The one in private rooms where my labor got discussed like a resource. Instead, I said, "You kept Nolan comfortable. That is different." She rubbed at her forehead. "You think I don't know that he can be impossible. You think I haven't spent years smoothing things over. Then why keep smoothing?" She looked up. And for once, there was no polished answer waiting. "Because after your father left," she said quietly, "Nolan was loud and charming and easy to put forward. And you," she stopped there. "And I what?" "You didn't ask to be seen." I stared at her. The audacity of that. The precision of it. As if invisibility had been my preference. As if being ignored is the same thing as being modest. I said, "I was a child." Her eyes filled, but I felt oddly calm. That used to be the kind of thing that would have hollowed me out for days. Not anymore. Grief had already burned through that part earlier in the evening. She whispered, "I know." It was the first honest thing she had said all night. Downstairs, I could hear Nolan's voice rising in the corridor. Not words yet, tone, then Celeste cutting in, then the hard, flat sound of a door shoving open. I did not go down immediately. My mother asked the next question without looking at me. "Will you help save the contract?" There it was again. Not will you stay. Not are you all right. Not what do you need. Will you help save the thing we endangered? I answered carefully because I wanted her to hear every part of it. I will help save the arena. She looked at me. Not Nolan's image. Not this family arrangement. Not the lie that he can keep using people and call it leadership. Her shoulders dropped an inch. That may mean he loses everything. I picked up the plant logs again. Then he should have read what came with ownership. When I went downstairs, Celeste was gone. Nolan was by the side doors, pacing. He stopped the moment he saw me. His hair had fallen out of place. His tie was gone. His suit jacket hung open and wrong. "Did you know she swapped the packet?" "Yes." He let out a short, broken laugh. "And you still let me sign?" "Yes." He shook his head like the room itself had tilted. "You really hate me that much." That was the family translation again. If I refused to rescue him, it had to be hatred. It could not be memory. It could not be justice. It could not be consequence. I said, "No, I just stopped protecting you from yourself." He looked at me for a long time, then away. "Adrian wants a restructuring proposal by Monday. The mayor wants an emergency council meeting tomorrow afternoon. Celeste says we can still spin this." I almost smiled at that. Of course she does. He rubbed both hands over his face. "If I step back publicly, the whole town will say I was never capable." I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the last mercy. It gives people a place to hear themselves. He lowered his hands. "Was Granddad really going to leave me out?" "No," I said. "He was going to make you earn your way into it." That hit harder than accusation. He looked toward the dark sheet under the event flooring, toward the building he had wanted, mostly because it reflected him well, and said in a voice stripped clean of polish, "I never thought you'd let me fail." I answered him with the truth he had spent years building toward. "You never thought I had a choice." The emergency council meeting happened the next afternoon in the municipal chamber above the library. Belmere liked old wood and bad acoustics. The room had both. By 1:30, every chair was taken. Parents from the hockey association, 2 senior skaters from the morning session, local press, contractors who smelled possible work, donors pretending they were there out of civic concern instead of appetite. The mayor sat at the center table with the town clerk and the legal advisor. Nolan arrived in a dark suit and no confidence. My mother sat in the second row, hands folded too tightly. Celeste did not come. That told me she had already started planning her distance. I wore the same navy sweater I had worn under my work jacket the night before. Dale was there, Omar too. Jenna sat near the back beside the volunteer coordinator and gave me one small nod when I entered. Council opened with procedure. Sponsorship review suspended. Questions raised about operational oversight. Concerns over deferred infrastructure exposure. Public confidence, contract continuity. All those neat civic phrases. Then the clerk read the critical point into the record. The signatory on the owner-operator assumption packet had accepted interim liability without completed technical certification. Murmurs. The mayor invited Nolan to speak first. He stood, cleared his throat, put both hands on the table like that could steady him. He began with the usual language: pride, vision, service, commitment. Then he made the mistake of trying to shift blame onto process. He said he had been handed the wrong packet. The legal advisor asked whether he had read the packet before signing. Nolan hesitated. That pause cost him more than any accusation could have. The answer was visible. Council member Harris, who had once played veterans league hockey at the rink and still hated being sold nonsense, asked the next question. "Mr. Vale, in the event of a refrigerant issue during your interim period, could you personally describe the first 3 required response actions?" Nolan stared at him. Silence. He started with, "Well, obviously safety comes first." Harris cut in. "That is not a response plan." Nolan had nothing. The mayor turned to me then. "Miss Vale, would you approach the table?" I did. Not because I wanted the stage. Because for the first time, the invitation was made to the right person in the right room for the right reason. The clerk swore me in. My hand was steadier than I expected. I explained the deferred warnings, the delayed spending, the difference between cosmetic investment and plant survival, the operational structure my grandfather had intended. The risk of signing version C without technical sign-off. The exact overnight readings from the South system. No speeches. No vengeance. Just facts. When I finished, the room was still. Then the legal advisor asked, "In your professional opinion, can Belmere Civic Arena remain open through winter under the current arrangement?" I said, "Not safely, not responsibly." "Can it remain open under a different arrangement?" "Yes." What arrangement? That was the moment. Not the gala, not the red light. This. I laid out a 90-day stabilization plan. Independent plant authority. Emergency capital release. Frozen discretionary spending. Joint records review. Technical sign-off required on all contract communication. Interim operating leadership separated from public relations and donor management. Councilmember Harris asked, "And who would lead the technical side?" I answered, "I will, if the authority is real." The mayor looked at the rest of council, then at the sponsor rep, who had joined remotely on a screen from Toronto and was watching without expression. Adrian Pike spoke first. "Frost North will reinstate review if Belmere adopts Miss Vale's stabilization plan and removes Mr. Vale from interim operational authority." There it was. Clear. Public. Structural. My mother shut her eyes. Nolan did not. He looked straight ahead as the motion was proposed. Temporary suspension of Nolan Vale from operational signing authority. Immediate interim appointment of Rowan Vale as acting operations director for the stabilization period. Mandatory review of prior spending decisions. Deferred sponsorship reinstatement pending 30-day progress check. Council voted. Not close. Nolan sat through it without moving. When it was done, the mayor read the result into the room, and the old chamber, with its bad speakers and hard seats and town gossip pressed into every corner, became the place where my family's arrangement finally stopped being treated like natural law. After the meeting, people came up to shake my hand. Parents. Staff. 2 old skaters from the morning club. The woman from the bakery who had asked if I was still helping out. She looked embarrassed and said, "I didn't realize." I said, "I know." Because that was the thing. Most of the town had not been cruel on purpose. They had just accepted the story told by the people holding the microphone. That was over now. At the chamber doors, Nolan stopped beside me before I could leave. He did not touch my arm. He did not raise his voice. He just said, "You won." I looked at him. "No, I'm working." Then I walked past him and out into the cold. Winter in Belmere did not care who had lost face at a gala. Pipes still needed checking at dawn. Kids still arrived with untied skates and one mitten missing. Parents still wanted to know whether the Saturday tournament would go ahead. That helped. Real work has a way of saving you from the performance of revenge. The first 3 months after council were brutal and clean. I took the office Nolan had used for donor calls and turned it into a planning room. No glass awards, no framed renderings. Just system diagrams, spending schedules, maintenance boards, and a kettle that hissed whenever someone forgot it too long. Dale came back 3 days a week on contract. Omar handled electrical oversight full-time. Jenna moved into operations coordination and turned out to be better at practical flow than anyone upstairs had guessed. The volunteer canteen women sent soup during the longest week of the Chiller Review and never let me pay. Frost North reinstated sponsorship after 32 days. Not because of a speech. Because the numbers stabilized. The plan held. The room could finally trust what it was being told. Nolan resigned from public leadership before council could make the suspension permanent. The statement he released was polished and careful. It used phrases like, "in the best interests of Belmere," and, quote, "allowing operational experts to guide the next phase." No one believed he had written it alone. Celeste moved to Kingston that spring and told people she had been considering the change for ages. My mother stayed in town. That was harder. Not because she fought, because she began trying. The first time she came to the rink after council, she stood awkwardly by the old photo case and asked whether she could bring coffee up to the planning room. I almost said no, not out of cruelty, out of disbelief, but I said yes. We were never magically healed. I do not trust stories that tie a ribbon around decades of hierarchy and call it love. She apologized in pieces over time. Not once, many times. For introductions, for omissions, for teaching me that being low maintenance was the same thing as being worthy. Some of it was clumsy. Some of it came too late. Some of it mattered anyway. Nolan and I did not become close. That was never on the table. He took a job 2 towns over with a private event group that liked his smile more than any machinery he could not explain. We spoke twice that year, both times about paperwork transfer, both times politely. The shock of it was not that he hated me after. It was that he finally stopped assuming I existed to absorb what he dropped. That changed everything. By the next winter, the south chiller had been replaced. The plant room no longer sounded like a threat trying to stay polite. The Gala returned, smaller and better. No false grandeur, no symbolic signing on the ice. Just local sponsors, honest numbers, and a printed program that named every operations lead, volunteer coordinator, technician, cleaner, and event hand who made the building run. My name was there. So was Dale's. So was Omar's. So was Jenna's. I stood by the program table longer than necessary, fingertips resting on the cardstock, not because print matters more than work, but because erasure leaves strange scars. Sometimes seeing the correction in black ink helps more than it should. That night, the mayor asked whether I wanted to say a few words. I said yes. Only a few. I stood under the rink lights, looked out at the parents, staff, donors, skaters, town council, and the little kids already trying to peer past the rope barrier toward the ice. Then I said, this building doesn't run on image. It runs on people who show up before the doors open and stay after the lights go off. Belmere is strongest when credit follows responsibility. That was all. It was enough. Later, after cleanup, I went down to the plant room alone. The new panel lights were steady. The floor was dry. The old desk was still there, though the top had been refinished. In the drawer, I kept Granddad's note. Don't argue with a man who needs witnesses to feel tall. Let him choose in public. Then make him keep the choice. I touched the corner of the paper and laughed once under my breath. You were impossible, I told the empty room. Then I looked at the gauges and added, you were right. People sometimes ask whether I regret letting Nolan sign that packet. No, I regret the years before it. The years I accepted being translated by other people. The years I thought keeping the peace meant handing over reality to whoever dressed it best. But that night at the gala, I did not destroy my brother. I stopped standing between him and the truth. There is a difference. The arena is still there now. Cold mornings, skate marks, booster club bake sales, senior walking laps before noon, teenagers taking selfies by the old banners. Real life. Slightly messy. Never glamorous enough for the version Nolan tried to sell. Better than that. Stable. Granddad used to say ice holds if you understand pressure. He was right about that too. And now, when people in Belmere ask who runs the place, nobody says I help out. They say my name.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more, you can follow this channel. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon to be notified when a new video is uploaded.